Hi, and welcome to week 2 of Compassion Camp. It's good to be with you to do a Lectio Divina style of reading of the beginning of the second chapter of Mark's Gospel. It's about the healing of a man suffering from paralysis. It's important to remember as you hear this story what Marcus Borg reminds us, that there are more healing stories about Jesus the healer than about any other healer in the Jewish tradition. So these ought to be taken seriously. I'm also going to invite you to reflect on this in the style of Lectio Divina. So listening to it reflectively, meditatively, and just letting the words flow in and soak. If there's a word or a phrase that pops up for you, make a note of it. And then come back, write it down maybe, and see what that might be saying to you. I'm also going to be showing you some pictures of really early representations of this healing story. One of them is from Dura Europos in Syria, and one is from Ravenna in Italy. The one from Dura Europos is really early. It's 3rd century, so the 200s, and it's actually the earliest extant picture of Jesus performing a healing miracle. Dura Europos, as I said, is in Syria, and it was an interesting city in that it was abandoned in the year 256 or 257. And the people who were doing the excavation, the archaeological excavation of this, happened to be from Yale. And so the image you see of this fresco actually doesn't live in Syria anymore. It lives in New Haven at the Yale Art Museum. You and I may have various feelings about sort of archaeological imperialism and the way archaeologists in the 19th and 20th centuries sometimes apprehended works of art and brought them to their home countries. But in this case, I'm going to hazard a guess that this was a good thing because the rest of Dura Europos was destroyed by the Islamic State between the years 2011 and 2017. So this fresco that I'll let you see is really primitive, but it speaks loudly about the importance of the story that you're about to hear. The other image is a later image. It's from the 6th century. We know that the basilica in which it resides, Sant'Apollinare Nuovo in Ravenna, was consecrated first in the year 504. By the Ostrogoth emperor, and these were the barbarians that came down from the north. They were Arian Christians who didn't necessarily believe that Jesus was fully human and fully divine. And then after it was retaken by the Roman Empire in its 6th century form, it was reconsecrated under the Emperor Justinian in 561. If you ever have the chance to go to Ravenna, please do go. The mosaics there are incredible, and it's like being transported back 1,500 years. One of the reasons that I love to see artwork representations of the Bible and of the stories of our faith is that it gives us a glimpse into what was important to Christians then, what they made of it, and what those representations might evoke within us today. The shorthand for that is a way of interpretation of the Bible that I learned from Ed Everding, a dear professor of mine who's no longer with us at ILEF. And the shorthand says, so what do the words say? Meant, what did the words mean to the people who wrote them down? And then means, what do they mean to us today? Says, meant, means. So you can do that with visual art as well. What did it say? So it's a mosaic. It's 6th century. It was put up in a basilica in what was then one of the capitals of the Roman Empire. Why was that important? What did it mean to those people in the 6th century? And what can it mean to us today? How might that art impact us? So I offer you this story from the second chapter of Mark's Gospel. I'm going to be reading from 3 different translations. The first is the New Revised Standard Version, which is what we typically use at Plymouth. The second is a new translation. It's about 2 years old, by David Bentley Hart, who is an Orthodox Christian scholar, and his translation was published by Yale Press. And then third, the Scholars Edition translation, which can be found in Hal Tausig's book, A New Testament. So hear the story of the healing of the man with paralysis. When he returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was home. So many gathered around there that there was no longer room for them, not even in front of the door. And he was speaking the word to them. Then some people came, bringing to him a paralyzed man, carried by 4 of them. When they could not bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him. And having dug through it, they let down the mat on which the paralytic lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now, some of the scribes were sitting there, and they were questioning in their hearts, "Why does this man speak this way? It is blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" At once, Jesus perceived in his spirit that they were discussing these questions among themselves, and he said, "Why do you raise such questions in your heart? Which is easier, to say, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Stand up, take your mat and walk'? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic, "I say to you, stand up, take your mat, and go to your home." And he stood up. And immediately he took the mat and went out before all of them, so that they were amazed and glorified God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." The Gospel of Mark, chapter 2. And again, entering into Capernaum, after some days it was heard that he was in a house. And many gathered, so that there was not even room before the door. And he spoke the word to them. And they come bearing a paralytic to him, carried by 4 men. And not being able to reach him on account of the crowd, they took away the roof where he was. Having gouged out an opening, they lowered the pallet on which the paralytic lay. And Jesus, seeing their faith, says to the paralytic, "Child, your sins are forgiven." But some of the scribes were sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, "Why does he speak thus? He blasphemes. Who can forgive sins except God alone?" And Jesus, immediately aware in his spirit that they reasoned thus among themselves, says to them, "Why do you reason these things over in your hearts? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Rise up and take your pallet and walk'? But in order that you should know that the Son of Man has power to forgive sins on earth. He says to the paralytic, I say to you, rise, take up your pallet, and go to your house. And he arose, and immediately taking up his pallet, went out before everyone, so that they were astonished and glorified God, saying, we have never seen the like. The Gospel according to Mark, the 2nd chapter. Some days later, when Jesus came back to Capernaum, the news spread that he was in a house there. And so many people collected together that after a while there was no room for them, even around the door. And he began to speak powerfully to them. Some people came, bringing him a paralyzed man who was being carried by 4 of them. Being, however, unable to get near to Jesus, owing to the crowd, they removed the roofing from above Jesus. And when they had made an opening, they let down the mat on which the paralyzed man was laying. When Jesus saw their trust, he said to them, Child, your sins are forgiven. But some of the scholars who were sitting there were debating in their minds, why does this man speak like this? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins except God? Jesus, at once intuitively aware that they were debating with themselves in this way, said to them, why are you debating in your minds like this? Which is easier, to say to the man, your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up, take your mat, and walk? But so that you may know that the child of humanity has power to forgive sins on earth. Here he said to the paralyzed man, to you I say, get up, take your mat, and return to your home. The man got up immediately, and he took his mat and went out before them all, at which they were all amazed. And as they praised God, they said, we have never seen anything like this.